W'lanoashaichi aya squiao ku imi naimamu ku imilau tiwama inknashwaniksha Karina Miller. I'm here today for the Indigenous short question and answers with some of the subjects and amazing filmmakers who submitted Indigenous shorts to the 18th annual Bend Film Festival. I had a wonderful experience along with Boise and Laron as jurors for this panel. We had multiple discussions. The decisions were extremely hard. Each of these films brought different stories and different ways of telling those stories and really unpacked really complicated histories and tied it to modern day. So I'm really here just to help facilitate a conversation with some of the directors and some of the subjects. And we're going to start out. I'm just going to go around and maybe kick it off to Gemma to do an introduction about who you are and a little bit about the film you worked on.
Aloha, hola to everybody. Ke hola, that's how we say it in Pucapucan. My name is Gemma Cubero del Barrio. I'm a Spanish-born and an American also filmmaker. I have done the film titled Our Atoll Speaks, or Tala Tala Maito Maito Wenua, in the atoll of Puka Puka, that is in the Cook Islands. And this is a film that I did with the entire community of Puka Puka and Nassau. That is also another atoll next to it. I never thought I would be making this film. This film emerged, like Puka Puka emerges in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, while I was making another film. And the film is really tells the story of this island and the incredible wisdom and knowledge that they have around adaptation and conservation and climate change. And I'm very happy to be here at Bend and to be with all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gemma, for being here. Next, we'll go to Joe Buffalo.
Thanks. My name's Joe Buffalo. I'm from Samson Cree Nation, Musquecheese, Alberta, Canada. I'm a Prairie Cree Dog Group Dene. And yeah, coming to you from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish Nation in so-called Vancouver, British Columbia. And yeah, I was approached to make this film fresh into my sobriety. I've been sober for about 3 years and 10 months. And in the very beginning stages, I was approached by this director who said, I met you back in 05 and this and that. And so I kind of like took a dive into like trusting myself and trusting him and just self-trust and developing new like living positive patterns in life and whatnot. And so yeah, I had a history with the director. And so that allowed me to have one foot in, whereas before I was in survival mode, not trusting absolutely anybody, especially with something like my story. And so, yeah, as I slowly got to know myself better and better, I was like more familiar with like, you know, my spirituality. And I knew it was always there, you know what I mean? My ways of healing and my ways of getting past the dark stages of my life. And so by having him with his direction and my talent, along with the director of photography, Liam Mitchell, who's also I've known for over 25 years, it happened so organically and so like, yeah, it didn't feel, I felt no pressure at all in telling my story. That when by the time it was done and everything was wrapped, I was like, felt like I could have went another 16 days, you know? And so yeah, I'm just hyped that it's getting the attention it's getting and it's being received well. And actually today is in Canada is Truth and Reconciliation Day. And so big day, you know, especially if you're like a survivor or whatever. And so I went to go and get coffee, and just down the street from my place, there was a giant gathering. You can tell by the t-shirts. So I live in the area and these happen once a week. And today was the day where I was like, you know what? I like had my umbrella and my coffee. I walked over. I'm like, today's the day I'm gonna grab the mic. So I like right before I came here, I actually spoke to a few hundred people in a giant park and just like straight drop truth bombs, and it was just in my own little spin, and so anyways, so I'm just really fortunate to be here and to be able to like go and have the power to be able to speak my truth on such a high level. And yeah, it's just beautiful, you know what I mean, having this new lease on life, being 100 with the creator and being able to just do the work, and show up for myself. So this film is just it's a small example of what you can do if you actually believe in yourself and trust yourself, spiritually. And so I'm happy that usually it's Amar and myself that are here doing this, so we kind of just like rebound stuff off each other and whatever. But yeah, this is great. I'm happy that the film's doing well and it's being heard.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And thank you for reminding us that we were in the community. I'm actually from Warm Springs, the Warm Springs Reservation in Central Oregon. And so a lot of people here in our community are actually wearing orange today and having these conversations too, because all of this is, has been suppressed. This education around boarding school and assimilation, it's not necessarily taught even in public schools to Native people. And so all these things are important. So thanks for wearing your orange. I don't actually have an orange shirt, but I am going to get one soon. So next we'll go to Shelby Adams.
Hi, my name is Shelby Mitchell Adams. My Mohawk name is Jowiliosta, and I'm from the Akwesasne Mohawk Indian Reservations. And my reserve is straddles New York State, Ontario, and Quebec. So we're like right on the border, and it's pretty interesting, the area geographically. So yeah, my film is The Roots of Lacrosse, and it basically tells the story of the creator's game and how it's played all across Turtle Island. And it's co-directed and co-written with Honest Engine Films, and they're based out of Los Angeles. And so yeah, that's pretty much what we did. Lacrosse, I love the game of lacrosse and everything about it. And I couldn't play the game myself because, living on the reservation, women weren't allowed to play. But it's been a huge part of my life, right from the get-go. My dad's a fisherman, so he would catch fish, and my job was to take the spine of the fish, and then I'd dry that out, and then we'd sell that to stick makers, wooden stick makers, and they would use that string and string up the lacrosse sticks, the traditional lacrosse sticks. So that's where the game of lacrosse started for me. And then throughout the years, I just loved to watch the sport and know everything about the sport. And now my children play. So women were probably about 10 years ago finally able to play the game. And I couldn't play, but my kids play. So I'm just so grateful that we could play the game finally. Yeah.
Thank you, Shelby. We actually did also I did feel like there could have been a whole nother movie just about the evolution of gender in lacrosse after watching that film. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I said the same thing because it's actually The Roots of Lacrosse is part of a bigger picture, and it actually falls under the rules of lacrosse. So we have a bunch of segments that we're going to put together in the end and create one big series, and The Roots of Lacrosse is the very beginning.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Thank you. And finally, I believe our last panelist is Lucy.
Yes, hi, I'm Lucy Ostrander. I'm an independent documentary filmmaker based on Bainbridge Island in the land of the Suquamish people. My film, Honor Thy Mother, is the untold story of Aboriginal women and their Indipino children. The Indipinos are the children, now elders, of Aboriginal and Indigenous women, many of whom were forced to attend Canadian Indian residential schools, and Filipino immigrants. And the background is that in the spring of 1942, Japanese Americans on Bainbridge Island were the first in the country to be taken away and sent to concentration camps. And many of the Japanese Americans on Bainbridge were strawberry farmers, and they employed Filipino immigrants. And so they turned to the Filipino immigrants to run the farms, to bring in the crops, pay the taxes, and save the land. But the Filipinos needed additional help. And so they recruited not only entire Indigenous families from British Columbia, but a lot of these young Aboriginal women who had been forced to attend these schools where they were not allowed to speak their native languages or practice their cultural traditions. And some of them ran away from the schools, and some came down looking for a better life. And they were teenagers. And they came down in the spring of 1942, and many of them fell in love with the Filipino bachelors, married, and started families. And the children from these marriages, as they started to reach adulthood and were looking for an identity for themselves, started to call themselves Indipinos. And this is their story of growing up, the intergenerational trauma, growing up with mothers who had attended these residential schools. And they grew up very poor. They grew up without indoor plumbing or electricity or running water. And it's a powerful story that they have not told until now. And I was honored to have been asked by the Indipino community to make this film. And I worked closely with the Indipino community to make sure it was accurate, because unlike other films that I've done where I specialize in historical documentaries, where I would go and find an academic to interview or read books about the subject, other than reading books about the residential schools, there were no books or no academics to go to say, well, can you tell me this history? So it was all, relying on the Indipinos and their stories. So that's the film.
Well, thank you, Lucy. I think our first question was going to be to have you each talk about what inspired you to work on these films, or what was kind of the process that came about. And so I think we'll go backwards this time, Lucy, since you were already starting to kind of talk about how this began. And I think, looking at the kind of time period of the kinds of things you worked on, it's clear that it really is this historical perspective. So for me, I will say your film really had an impact because I am from Warm Springs, and I do have Yakima heritage, and I do have blues from Colville. And so I'm very mixed. So for me, this story I felt like a story for me as an Indigenous person, because it wasn't just looking at the surface identity or a pan identity. It was this deeper, more intergenerational look. So if you can just continue to expand on kind of what led you to this specific community of Indigipino, is that the term?
Indipino is what
Indipino. I mean,
yeah.
If you can just further explain some of that process.
Well, I had made a film. I had been commissioned to make a film back in 2007 on the history and the cultural history of the Filipino American community on Bainbridge Island. And in making that film, I interviewed some of the Indipinos. But it wasn't until, and so it was one of the women that we had interviewed for that film who contacted me in the summer of 2019 and said, we have a small grant to do some oral histories, and maybe we could make a film. And so we did these oral histories with the 6 Indipinos. We also shot some footage of their Indigenous Peoples Day event and a drum making workshop. And in the Indigenous Peoples Day, there was a woman who came she was from Squamish in British Columbia. And she was, I think at the time in her late 80s. And while she had not, she had come down to pick berries, but she had not married one of the Filipino immigrants. She had gone back to British Columbia, but she had attended a residential school on Vancouver Island. And So we did sort of a last minute, a quick interview. And at first, when in the editing process, I wasn't even quite sure how to incorporate that. But suddenly I realized, her story, we were going to start out with her story about what it was like to be taken away at the age of 5. And she says, she didn't know where she was going. We did these interviews, and we put together a sample of a 15-minute sort of promotional piece of some of the best parts of these interviews, and showed it to a foundation on Bainbridge Island. And they had a maximum of $10,000 and that they could give. And that's what we applied for. And one of the people who was on this board had gone to school with the Indopinos and was so moved by what he saw. He said he wrote to 20 of his friends to all donate. So I'm not going to say exactly how much we got, but we got a lot more than the 10,000, more than they had ever given to any organization. That's how this project came together. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an open discussion really about it. And I think, when I saw it, and I did think, because I am from a reservation in a Native community, and I think the reason I was so excited to be a part of this is we can't rely on public education to help us learn about these difficult truths, these real histories that Indigenous people have faced. It's hard even within our tribal communities to talk about these things and to tell these stories. So film and storytelling and these things really are that way. And I will say that there is a lot of families here who are mixed race, who are Filipino, who are Mexican, who are Hawaiian. And a lot of us didn't really realize these things until we became adults. And so I like to see these things kind of unraveled and these intersections explored.
And this story is not known on Bainbridge. We're going to have 2 screenings for Indigenous Peoples Day coming up at the high school, which seats at the theater, seats like 375 people. And while it's a free screening, people have to reserve a seat, and both screenings are sold out because people want to see this film. So
amazing.
Yeah.
And so now we'll hop back over to Gemma to talk about, your film, Our Atoll Speaks. It really, to me, I really appreciated the existing food system still being the main source for this community and being able to see that. And even though there was some foods introduced from more colonial systems, that wasn't the backbone of it. But this real story of the world is imposing on these islands in a way that they can't control. And so if you can just talk more about your process of how this all came together.
Yes, thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, I never thought I would be making this film for the last 10 years. And actually today, I just completed a film about Puka Puka and 2 women from Puka Puka. That was the original idea why I first went to Puka Puka. But in the process of making the island in me, I went to Puka Puka once in 2015 with the 2 main characters of the film that are actually daughters of the island. And it was that film was about the journey back to their home island. So we were there for only 5 weeks. Puka Puka doesn't have a scheduled transportation. So I knew that the shoot had to be very contained. But when I went there in 2015 to film, I was just so blown away by the richness of place. I was supposed to be making this film about these 2 women, and then I did like thousands of interviews with elderly, with children, with everybody. I was just completely blown away. And I realized I needed to charter a plane out and take everybody back home to Hawaii. But I knew within myself that I was not done with the film. So fast forward a few more years, in 2017, Amelia Borowski, who is actually from Hawaii, also grew up in Puka Puka, found out that there was a grant that we could go to from the UN that was coming out of the Red Cross in the Cook Islands, but it was a fund that was, they have never funded films. but we applied and we said we'd like to use it to continue filming and for me to return and live there for some time and work with the community. And the United Nations asked me to, part of the grant was to deliver something about climate change. It was like a 2 to 3 minute film, not even documentary, video on climate change. So I went there with Amelia in 2017. I lived there for 5 months and we did a storytelling workshop for the community. I had already like so much material that I knew I could use, but it was a really profound experience because I was able to live there and really gather all the wisdom and knowledge that the Pukapukan people have. So going back to Hawaii, I knew I had to deliver something, and I talked to the funding source and I said, let me just do a short film and let me just do a film about the power of the people. You know, there's so many films about climate change that are, you know, it's just about the horrific situations with climate change. But what I was really taken by was by the beauty of place, by what you just mentioned, the ancestral wisdom and knowledge that they have around surviving and living with nature, and food security, adaptation. I just felt like we all felt that they have so much to offer to the world, to the rest of the world. Puka Puka is part of the Cook Islands, but they do believe that they emerged from a rock, and they have their own language. So for more than 2,000 years, they have been practicing this, the fishing, the hunting, and what we did in Hawaii, and this is a film that I did with everybody. I talked to Amelia and Johnny, the two characters of this other film. And what we did is gather, I have so many interviews that we translated all the Pukapukan interviews. And when you hear the voice in the film, it's not me saying what I think about Puka Puka. It's not even Johnny and Amelia. Each line was extracted from interviews from the people in Puka Puka, Nassau. So when you hear in the film at the end, if Puka Puka goes under, I will go under. That is completely extracted from the people. And then the voice is the voice of this Pukapukan woman that lives in Hawaii. So, you know, it was a beautiful process because first I never thought I would be making it. And then the film really emerged and I just kind of let the people and the process guide me to do something that will be for them and by them. And at the end, I called the Island Council and I said, can you give me the names of absolutely everybody in Puka Puka? And if you look at the film credits, you will see like I listed them just as they gave it to me, like by men, women, and children. So it's really a very profound experience.
I mean, unfortunately, we actually have to wrap up right now. But I personally feel like these sort of conversations are better than anything else. And this is what's real, and your life and your story and your feelings and saying, even the way we tell stories can sometimes hurt, that's real. So I'm sorry we didn't have more time. I'm sorry we couldn't talk more about things, but I do appreciate you all being here and everything everyone brought to the films and to this conversation.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.